You hand over a piece of plastic, or you tap your phone, and somehow a stranger on the other side of the world just agreed you owned something new. You never questioned it. Neither did they. But stop and think about it for a second. Why would anyone accept a number on a screen or a scrap of paper in exchange for real food, real shelter, real hours of their life? The story you were probably taught goes like this. Long ago, people bartered. You had chickens, your neighbor had shoes, and you traded directly. Eventually, that got clumsy, so humans invented money to make trading easier. It's a tidy story. It's also, according to the people who actually study this, mostly untrue. The anthropologist Caroline Humphrey spent years searching for a society that ran primarily on barter, the chicken for shoes economy you learned about in school. She never found one. Not a single documented case anywhere at any point in history of an economy built mainly on direct trade between strangers. And when you actually picture barter working the way the textbook version describes it, it starts to fall apart. Imagine you have extra grain and you need shoes. You have to find someone who happens to have extra shoes and who also happens to want exactly your grain at exactly this moment. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants. In practice, across a whole village, that coincidence almost never lines up cleanly enough to run an entire economy on. So if it wasn't barter, what was it? The answer is older, stranger, and honestly more human than invented for convenience. And understanding it changes how you see every transaction you make today. Picture a small ancestral community. 20, 30, maybe 60 people, all known to each other by name, by face, by history. This is roughly the scale anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent his career studying, the natural size of a human social world our brains evolved to track. In a group that small, you don't need to trade evenly in the moment. You remember who helped who. Someone gives you meat from a good hunt. You don't hand them anything back right away, you simply owe them. Not on paper, in memory, in relationship, in the quiet social ledger every human carries around without even trying. This is the real starting point of money. Not trade, debt. The writer and anthropologist David Graeber spent much of his career tracing this idea. He argued that long before coins existed, humans were already running economies of obligation, favors owed, generosity remembered, promises to repay someday. Money, when it eventually appeared, didn't replace the system. It grew out of it as a way to formalize the debts a small tribe used to just remember by heart. Think about that for a moment. Before money was a thing you could hold, it was a thing you could feel, a sense of I owe them, a sense of they owe me. That feeling didn't come from an economics textbook. It came from millions of years of living in small, independent groups where your survival depended on other people trusting you to repay what you took. Which raises a gentler question. Why do we trust money at all? The historian Yuval Noah Harari has a simple, almost startling answer. Money, he argues, is one of the most successful shared stories humans have ever told each other. A coin has no nutritional value. A banknote can't shelter you from rain. Its only power comes from the fact that millions of strangers who will never meet have all silently agreed to believe in it together. That's the real magic trick. And Harari's larger point goes even further than money itself. He argues that humans became the dominant species on this planet not because we're individually the strongest or the fastest, but because we're uniquely capable of believing in shared fictions together at massive scale. Nations, laws, religions, and money are all, in his framing, stories millions of strangers agree to trust at once. Money just happens to be one of the oldest and most successful of those stories. Somewhere around 5,000 years ago, in places like ancient Mesopotamia, temple accountants began keeping formal records of grain owed and grain repaid. Clay tablets tracked debts the way your memory once did in a small band of relatives. As communities grew larger, from dozens of people to hundreds, then thousands, memory stopped being enough. You can hold 60 relationships in your head. You cannot hold 60,000. So debt, once tracked by trust and memory, needed a physical stand-in, something that could travel between strangers who had no history together at all. That stand-in eventually became coins, then paper, then, much later, the number on a screen you barely think about today. Here's a quick moment to pause the deep dive. If tracing the ancient roots of everyday human behavior like this is landing for you, following along genuinely helps this small channel keep growing. All right, back to the story. What's remarkable is how consistently this pattern shows up. Nearly every early civilization that developed complex trade, from Mesopotamia to ancient China to West Africa, first developed systems of debt and obligation, and only later standardized physical currency to represent it. Cowrie shells functioned as currency across parts of Africa and Asia for centuries, small and light enough to carry, rare enough to hold value, impossible to counterfeit with the tools available at the time. Cacao beans were used as money in Mesoamerica, so valuable that counterfeiters were once caught hollowing out real beans and refilling them with dirt. Salt paid Roman soldiers, cattle measured wealth across much of early Africa and Europe, and on the remote island of Yap, communities used enormous carved stone discs, some taller than a person, as currency. The astonishing part is that everyone on the island knew exactly who owned which stone, even when the stone itself never physically moved from its spot. Ownership was tracked entirely through shared memory and agreement, a living record with no ledger at all except the community's collective mind. The materials were wildly different. The underlying idea was identical everywhere. A shared symbol standing in for a promise between people who trust the same story. Even the word credit carries this ancient fingerprint. It comes from the Latin credere, to believe. Every time you use a credit card, you are, in a very real sense, asking a stranger to believe you. There's another piece of this story worth sitting with. Debt in these early systems wasn't just financial, it was moral. It carried weight. In many early legal codes, including the famous Code of Hammurabi in ancient Babylon, some of the very first written laws humans ever recorded were about debt. Who owed what to whom, what happened if a debt went unpaid, how long someone could be bound to work off what they owed. Before there were laws about violence, before there were laws about property, there were already laws about obligation. That tells you something important. Debt wasn't a side effect of civilization. It may have been one of the very things that pushed humans toward writing, toward law, toward organized society in the first place. The need to remember who owed what at a scale too large for memory alone may be part of why written language spread as fast as it did. David Graeber pointed out something else that tends to surprise people. Periodically, across many ancient societies, rulers would declare what he called a clean slate, all debts forgiven all at once, not out of pure kindness, but because a society where everyone owes everyone else too much eventually stops functioning. Even 5,000 years ago, humans understood that too much unresolved debt could quietly break a community apart. Which makes you wonder, maybe the discomfort you feel about debt today isn't just personal anxiety. Maybe it's an echo of something communities have wrestled with for as long as they've kept score. It's worth noticing, too, how differently debt was treated depending on who owed whom. In many ancient societies, a debt between neighbors within the same community carried a different moral weight than a debt owed to a distant ruler or foreign trader. Closeness mattered. Obligation wasn't just a number, it was wrapped up in relationship and how well you knew the person on the other side of the exchange. That's strikingly similar to how you probably feel today. Owing a close friend $20 feels completely different from owing a faceless company the same amount, even though mathematically the debt is identical. So, why does this matter to you, scrolling through a banking app in a world your ancestors could never have imagined? Because the discomfort you sometimes feel around money, the anxiety, the shame of owing someone, the awkwardness of asking to be repaid, isn't a personal flaw. It's an old, deeply wired social instinct, built for a small world of faces you knew, now operating inside a vast world of strangers you'll never meet. Your ancestors felt that same pull toward fairness, that same discomfort with unpaid debt, thousands of years before a single coin was minted. When you feel uneasy owing a friend money, or relieved after finally paying someone back, you're not being oversensitive. You're running software built for tribal survival. Think about how quickly you notice imbalance in a friendship. One person always picks up the check. One friend keeps inviting, and the other keeps forgetting to reciprocate. That quiet tally you keep, almost without meaning to, is the same tracking system your ancestors relied on to know who could be trusted within the group. It's not pettiness, it's a survival tool, thousands of generations old, still quietly running in the background of your closest relationships. Robin Dunbar's research suggests this is part of why gossip, reputation, and social trust matters so much to us even now. In a small ancestral band, your reputation for repaying what you owed, materially or socially, was almost as valuable as anything you actually possessed. A person known as reliable was fed, protected, included. A person known as unreliable risked being quietly left behind. And there's something oddly comforting in that. Money isn't some cold, purely rational invention layered on top of human nature. It is human nature, formalized. A story about trust and memory scaled up from a campfire to a civilization. It also explains something else, why a financial loss can feel like a personal betrayal, why being scammed doesn't just cost you money, it costs you a sense of safety in other people. Your ancestors' survival depended on knowing who could be trusted with what they owed. That's not a small modern inconvenience when it's violated. It touches something ancient. It also explains why generosity feels so good to give and so good to receive. Sharing what you have and having that shared moment remembered was never just kindness for its own sake in your ancestral past. It was how bonds were built, how alliances were formed, how a small band of humans became strong enough, together, to survive what none of them could have survived alone. In that light, every transaction you make today, however small, however digital, carries a faint trace of that older world. A world where wealth wasn't really about what you owned. It was about who trusted you and who you trusted in return. Every time you send money to a friend, tip a stranger, or simply trust that the number in your account still means something tomorrow, you're taking part in the same act of collective belief your ancestors practiced with grain, shells, and remembered favors. You told yourself money was invented to make trading easier. But it turns out money was never really about things at all. It was about people and the promises we've been keeping track of, one way or another, since the very first debt was owed. If this shifted something for you, there's another video waiting that picks up right where this one leaves off. Take care.